Hi, I'm Tony.
I'm Patrick.
And we want to welcome you to Cave of to the Cross Apologetics. This is our show where we work through various books, Christian books, theology, philosophy, apologetics, that sort of thing, and to help you to understand what's going on as we see it anyway. Now we're working our way through Nancy Pearcey's book, Finding Truth, 5 Principles for Unmasking Atheism, Secularism, and Other God Substitutes. And we have worked our way to Principle 5, right? This principle says that after we've identified the particular idol that every other worldview outside of Christianity has, right, then we look at how it's reduced by the particular proponent of that idol. And then we begin to critique it. We critique it with regard to how it fits the world, and we critique it with regard to whether or not it can consistently and logically hold up with regard to the principles that it holds. So we do an external critique, the world, and we do an internal critique. We apply what it says is true to itself, right? And she says because the worldviews outside of Christianity are reductionistic, then they all fail these various critiques, right? They attempt to take a piece of reality and make that the whole of reality. That's the idea of reductionism. Of course, when you do that, you leave things out, and therefore your worldview falls apart when it's examined in this way. So then once the worldview has fallen apart, right, after you examine it, what do we do we help them to pick up the pieces, right? Principle 5 says we replace the idol, we make the case for Christianity. And so that's what we've been working our way through here in this 5th chapter.
Right. So this where we're starting kind of spills over from the last episode. So if you haven't listened to that one, greatly suggest you do so. And we're kind of going through a series of quotes from people who freely and openly, sometimes not as loudly, but definitely some people that freely admit that they are freeloading atheists, that they are wanting to present their idea of a kind of this formless void of a universe that has started because of nothing. There's a process involved, but then we have to smuggle in things like free will and the ability to know things and non-material things that the Christian worldview is able to present and have an explanation for, have a foundation and a basis for. But they're coming through and saying, here's what our ideas lead to, which seems to be survival of the fittest, but we also want morality. So how do we achieve that? And they achieve that by stealing from the Christian worldview. And so,
or the world is just material, but we still want free will.
Yeah, we still want it to be free. So a proud atheist, a self-proclaimed proud atheist and evolutionist, Raymond Tallis, a medical doctor and author of Aping Mankind, says, boy, there's a lot of unexplained consequences as a result of an atheistic worldview, or at least a worldview devoid of God. Mm-hmm. And so he says things like, isn't there a problem in explaining how blind forces of physics brought about cognitively sighted humans who are able to see and identify and comment on the blind forces of physics? How do forces of physics create being that transcend those forces? Right. How do we add more to ourselves, our ethos, our character to transcend?
So the blind forces of physics created something that could recognize the blind forces of physics.
Yeah.
Right? Something that transcends it, right? How did that happen?
Why are humans able to rise above forces that supposedly created them and engage with the nature as if from the outside? Can a puppet gain control over the puppeteer? Things like, how did a purposeless process create beings with purposes? Or isn't there a problem with explaining how undesigned process could produce one species that is indeed a designer? How did we get humans? How did we humans get to be so different? How is it possible for humans to be so different from the forces that supposedly produce them? How can water rise above its source? Yeah. That's good, and those are good questions asked. And so we'll see his answer here. Reductionists would resolve the dilemma simply by decreeing that humans are not so different after all, Again, they don't want to talk about these things, and so well, we want to be above the universe and know it, but we can't really know it. That's what we would say. But do we? Yes. But do we know that? Yeah. Isn't that something that we can know? And so that seems to be an issue. In arts, Tallis says that he rejects reductionism, but he's concerned from a neurobiological reductionist point of view that it's starting to inculcate itself in other areas of the knowledge,
and everything else.
So things like in the arts, we have works of arts that that we're drawn to because it stimulates the reward centers of our brain, not because they're beautiful or because they're aesthetically pleasing in some fashion or it evokes emotion, but your neurons fire, and we know that's where the pleasure center is at. Just like how you eat a good peanut butter and jelly sandwich, looking at the David is just the same thing, just maybe in different quantities. Or how neuroliteracy, we love literature by scanning people's brains that read Shakespeare, and we see that they're reacting in some way. So it's just a brain process. Or legal theory, we figure out how to establish guilt or innocence, and we know this through MRI scans. And so we need to curtail laws to have guilt fire off more, so people won't commit crime.
That's right.
There are other things like neuroeconomics, where we use methods to determine how consumers' brains respond to brands and products. So again, it's not what praxeology would say, and that you make free actions and choice based upon your subjective needs, which is good Austrian economics point of view, but that you just respond to it. Something flashes. McDonald's puts red because red is a sign of hunger, and so you see red, you see at McDonald's, and you're like, I'm hungry. I'm hungry for McDonald's. I'll go towards the red to eat. And even neurotheology uses MRIs to find the God spot, the parts of the brain that supposedly lead people to conceive the idea of God and undergo mystical experiences. So these neurotheories are more faddish than factual, Tallis complains. And he has issues with all these things. So what's his idea? What is he replacing? What is his answer for all the reductionist points that he made here at the beginning of this part? What does he propose to the reductionists he so passionately opposes? Nothing.
Again.
Yeah. His quote is, "The truth is, I don't know."
Wow.
So again, throws the grenade, runs. Good luck. So, what do we learn about eavesdropping on atheists who are so open and honest about what they're experiencing and what their worldview says and what the implications are, and the fact that they don't like it? Well, first, many of them recognize the limitations and failure of their own worldview. A great point. We can agree on this. Yeah. I'm trying to think of. I always forget his name. He's always critical of Darwin's theory, and I mentioned it a couple episodes ago.
Oh yeah. It'll come to you.
Yeah, it will. But he has really good conversations with Christians, but he won't ever admit to a designer or intelligent designer or even that little bit. He just wants to be able to say, listen, these are all the big parts of it. And so it's a good place to kind of start to talk about things. And second, another useful point is that atheists find elements of the Christian worldview so appealing that they keep borrowing them. They are freeloaders. And again, so why is that a good thing? Because then you can point to that and say, whoa, hold on. Morality, you as a being of random chance and happenstance, and that there's
random laws and all that, or the laws of nature, whatever, you've kind of reduced it away. Right?
Yeah. You don't want to bring that into it, because that's a Christian idea, that you something esoteric outside of ourselves that holds us accountable to our actions. Justice? What is justice? How do you have justice in a world where you have the murderer able to get away and move to a different country and not be held accountable? And what does being held accountable even mean? Sitting in jail, is that justice? Those are questions that we can start pointing to and say, what is true justice? What does that look like?
Yeah. So her next section is entitled "Give Me That Old Time Philosophy." Right. And she says perhaps the most egregious example of freeloading is a movement to hijack the explicitly religious dimensions of Christianity. For example, there's a new field that uses philosophy to treat psychological problems. Right. It's labeled philosophical counseling. Right. And so the atheists who want the psychological comfort of Christianity while rejecting the content of Christianity can then, depend on philosophical counseling. And so she says a book on the subject titled Plato, Not Prozac, became an international hit. And she says you can even get certified to be a philosophical counselor. All right. So philosophical counseling may be a new field, she says, but the concept itself is not novel. Philosophers have never been merely academic. Folks, right? It's never been merely an academic enterprise. They believe with a God replacement. They begin, with a God replacement and develop an entire worldview, exhorting people how to make sense of life and to prepare for death.
And right? we saw this especially in Mitch Stokes' book, How to Be an Atheist. We see people like Neil deGrasse Tyson or Richard Dawkins or people like Carl Sagan who want to point you to the beauty of this pale blue dot and you make really pretty YouTube videos for it, and ultimately it's like, well, I'm just a speck of dust. I really don't mean anything. Everything that I put towards effort towards creating this video talking about how beautiful the pale blue dot is ultimately meaningless. Well, I guess I'm happy now. That's where I find my happiness, right?
Yeah, and meaninglessness.
Yeah, and so we've seen this rise. We've seen a rise of going away from kind of these philosophical thinkers to more men of science and saying, oh, you explain, where to find Halley's Comet really well, or the traverse of the stars and explanations for it. Tell me how I should live my life. And so we're seeing that right now in this day and age.
Yeah, good. Yeah. And so she gives some examples of this kind of idea and this kind of thinking, right? She talks about Pierre Haydock, I think is how you pronounce his word. In his book, Philosophy as a Way of Life, Haydock says, accepting a philosophy is like a religious conversion. It involves a total transformation of one's vision, lifestyle, and behavior. It turns our entire life upside down, right? You literally stake your life and your eternity on a set of ideas being true. She mentions that in the ancient world, when philosophy was still young, its life-transforming power was widely recognized. Hodot says he exhorted his charges, ancient philosophers, exhorted their charges to conversion, and then he directs his new converts to the path of wisdom. So Hodok is seeking to recover that spiritual role that the ancient philosophers had, right? She mentions other adherences to these particular issues as well. But her bottom line is this. She says the common thread running through these examples is that they are all attempts to fill the God-shaped hole with something other than God. Right? One book, she says, makes the claim frankly in its title, The Little Book of Atheist Spirituality. So atheists are even finding their own churches, right? They're even creating their own churches, founding their own churches.
Yeah. And they're splitting from each other on philosophical basis.
Yeah. Britain now has its first atheistic church. She tells us, according to news reports, dozens of gatherings dubbed atheist megachurches are springing up around the United States. So atheists, notice, are freeloading the ceremonies of religious worship, right? Yeah. They want to co-opt the rituals of Christianity while rejecting its reality. Yeah. Right. So.
But unfortunately, not all atheists are so brazen about admitting to the fact that they're stealing from Christianity.
Right.
And so we have people that commit to science that can function as an idol and an ultimate commitment. When science is treated as the sole source of truth, then it becomes scientism. This is Bertrand Russell, and he said, "What science cannot discover, mankind cannot know." Like that.
Yeah. So notice all knowledge is based on science.
Yep.
And you can get no other knowledge outside of science, right? So if it isn't based on science, you can't know it, is what he's saying, right? So what does that do to ethics, right?
Well, we'll test it. We'll weigh guilt and then we'll weigh not guilt. And so if you're heavier, I guess heavier would be bad, right? I think. And so we'll destroy ethics that way.
Well, what does that do to love?
Man, yeah. Well, that's just a chemical in your brain firing off. And, you just, the love for your wife is different than the love for your child. And I'm sure we can measure that and have different areas go off.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, it is a metaphysical assumption, an arbitrary definition of what counts as genuine knowledge, because they say all science, or all knowledge comes from what science can discover. Well, the one that I thought of, where John Gray here, he says, science hasn't enabled us to dispense with myths. Instead, it has become a vehicle for myths, chief among them the myth of salvation through science. Science remains one of today's most popular idols. Any claim that begins with "scientists now know" is likely to trump all competing claims. And so I was thinking of what's something that science knows. Well, eggs. Eggs are good for you, except for when they were bad for you 3 months ago. But then they were really good for you if you had certain things 3 months before that. But then they were really bad. And then salt tablets you should take, but now you shouldn't take them anymore. Right. But the scientists have come out and say, wear masks, don't wear masks. So we can be sure of what the science says. Yeah. There's man-made global warming, says the scientist, and there is not man-made global warming, says the scientist. So what does science say? Well, science doesn't say anything.
A lot of things, right?
Yeah. And again,
which could result in or equal nothing if you try to put them all together, right?
And this is what Mitch Stokes says: science doesn't say anything. Scientists say things. So that's how we should be phrasing our understanding. Don't give me what science says. Tell me what scientists say, and we can evaluate what scientists say and determine that. And there we can lead into a discussion on worldview. Yeah.
Good.
A commitment to science has even been shown to have psychological effects similar to religious commitment. The New Scientist reports on a study showing that under stress, atheists responding with a higher commitment to a belief in science. The article concludes, it is well known that religious faith can help people cope with stress and anxiety by providing them with a sense of meaning and control at times of uncertainty. It now seems that belief in science and rationalistic outlook might do the same for the non-religious. And this is scientism. This is replacing pretty much here God or a religious faith, a religious belief with science. Oh, science says that I don't have to worry about eating all that chocolate. Chocolate's good for me. Oh, okay. I little white lies are okay because they make you feel less guilty in the end. Okay, that's good. I'm glad science didn't do that. Even the theory of evolution, often cited as support for atheism, can function as a substitute for religion, and that's pretty obvious. And we see with worship, we see even that evolution is promulgated with as an ideology, a secular religion, a full-fledged alternative to Christianity with meaning and morality, and they've even had a funeral for our good friend Darwin, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense in the worldview of returning to dirt and that's all you are and nothing happens. Why commemorate any life? Continue on, continue having children, continue foraging for food. That's all you are. That's all you're good for. That's
right. That's the be all and end all of our existence.
Yeah. Right? Don't try to rise up above it because science hasn't told you anything different.
And of course, then that leads us to evolutionary religion, right? So Darwinism is not only the version of evolution on the market. It's not the only one. Most alternative theories are even more overtly religious. She talks to us about biologist Stuart Kaufman, who is well known for his theory of self-organization, but he does not regard it as merely another scientific theory. It is a, quote, new worldview, he tells us, right? With a new view of God, not as transcendent, not as agent, but as the very creativity of the universe itself. Whoa, right?
So pantheism.
Yeah, right. That's basically what he's saying, right? He treats God as a word for the ceaseless flux of the universe. He says that God is enough for him. So the question she asks is, then why even retain the word God, right? Which, connotes this transcendence and caring, intelligent person. He precisely to smuggle in the emotional power to connect the term. She says Kaufman is open about his intentions, right? He tells us, what do we gain by using the God word? I suspect a great deal, for the word carries with it awe and reverence. So he knows what he's doing here, right?
It reminds me of the debate that William Lane Craig had with a skeptic who kept ascribing qualities of God to a computer. And he got so far along that Craig would counterpoints and say, well, if you don't have this, then you have this. And then you're like, well, then you have this. And then, if you don't have this, then you have this. Well, then you're missing out on this. Okay, what if I have all those qualities? He goes, well, then we're just having a fight on the name, because what you just subscribed is the biblical Christian God. And he was like, oh, well, and of course, applause all around.
But the cause hasn't got to be God.
Well, remember I gave an argument for thinking that this cause is timeless, spaceless, immaterial, enormously powerful, and personal.
I think it's a computer.
Well, that wouldn't, computers are designed by people.
No, this is a self-designing computer.
Timeless.
Timeless.
Well, that's a contradiction in terms.
Why is it timeless? What's contradictory about it?
A computer has to function. It takes time.
No, this is a special computer.
Yeah, but it has to be logically coherent.
Oh, it's logically coherent.
Yes, you have to be logically coherent.
Oh, no, this computer is amazing.
No, besides, it would have to be, as I said, a personal being.
No.
A computer is a physical
Not this computer.
object.
Oh,
well, then,
no.
Okay, see, what you're doing is what you're calling a computer is really God. A non-physical,
So Kaufman, she says, hopes to inspire people to respond emotionally to a purely materialistic universe, and here it is, as if it were the personal God of the Bible. He is another freeloader.
Our flashing light of reductionism.
Right. All right. She talks about Jeremy Rifkin, who promotes a quasi-pantheistic version of evolution. He envisions evolution as a process whereby an immanent mind evolved up the ladder, the great chain of being. Right, so and evolution is no longer viewed as a mindless affair. Quite the opposite. It is mind enlarging its domain up the chain of the species. So in these words, we hear echoes of Hegel's concept of the absolute mind, right? Evolving up through the history. Rifkin goes on. One eventually winds up with the idea of the universe as a mind that oversees, orchestrates, and gives order and structure to all things. So notice he's suggesting you got to have this concept in order to explain what's going on, right? Where did it come from? Why do you have to have this concept in order to explain what's going on? Why do you right? What is?
And you see this within science fiction. I mean, you have man start out and then they reach towards the stars and they find the obelisk, and from there they become the star child, and until they're pure mind and energy and this transcendent idea of what humanity should be going towards. Just complete mind. So no material, just mind.
That's right. All right. She says, what are the implications of this pantheistic model of evolution? Well, she says, most obviously it eliminates a transcendent creator, which Rifkin takes to be a good thing. For it means that we no longer feel ourselves to be guests in someone else's home, right? Therefore, we no longer feel obligated to make our behavior conform to with a set of pre-existing cosmic rules.
Yeah, so we're no longer the creature.
Right. We are the creator, right? We're the architects of the universe. It's us. We put it together. We determine it, right? We're responsible for nothing outside of ourselves, for we are the kingdom, the power, the glory forever and ever, Rifkin tells us. Wow.
And then God comes along and says, whoa, hold on. You get your own dirt.
Yeah. So notice she says that recognizing the religious nature of secular worldviews creates a level playing field. So here's the apologetic application here, right? It undermines the pretensions of secularists to religious neutrality, which they use to claim superiority over religion. They claim to be objective and fact-based while discrediting religious as biased and faith-based. Yet no worldview is neutral, not even atheism or secularism. Right? And so so notice what drives these religious variants of evolution is a sense that there must be more to reality than the flat, one-dimensional vision offered by their materialism. Evolutionists are reaching out for higher dimensions to answer the human longing for greater meaning to life. Those longings are more expressions of general revelations. They are signposts, right, pointing to the biblical God.
Right, which is the whole point of what we're trying to do at this point.
Yeah.
And so she gives a particular example here, and it's her own example. And so I will just kind of briefly cover this because she really has talked about this before, especially in our episode 69, which was our interview with Nancy Pearcey, where she kind of highlights some of the points here of how she came to LaBrie and Francis Schaeffer and thought she was a Christian, wasn't, and then came back after a couple of years, which is a fun story to listen to. So just to cover a few points here, one way to highlight Christianity's attractive feature is to show where secularists borrow from it. Another way to ask is what you lose when you give it up. And so she then goes into what she thought she was giving up, and she was giving up things like her doubt, and she was doubting. She was going to people, and they were saying, "Oh, everyone doubts," or "Well, it works for me." And so the decision struck me as a matter of intellectual honesty. In principle, if you do not have good reasons for holding something, then how can you really say you believe it, whether Christianity or anything? Right. And so I think Plantinga might have a little disagreement with her on this, but I think generally people are going to agree with that statement. Yeah. So she looks at the universe and says, if it's all a chance product of blind material forces, what purpose does human life have? I know that as a Christian, my actions have significance, and that's only where that you would get the purpose and say that what my actions are lasts into eternity. Richard Dawkins writes, there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. Good night, folks. Have a good night. And he leaves the audience with that. Right. Except when he's challenged about things like, well, how should I live my life? Well, make fun of Christianity.
Do you love your children?
Is your wife faithful? How do you know that?
Yeah, and do you want her to be?
As a Christian,
put into the meaning of life. What is the meaning of life if you're?
What's the meaning of life on an evolutionary worldview? One thing to say is that the universe doesn't owe us any meaning. It could be that there is no meaning of life, and if so, that would be just tough. I don't think that, because I think that we can all make whatever meaning we choose to make, and each of you will have plenty of meanings in your own life. You'll be enthusiastic about some things, maybe some sport you play, maybe some books you read, maybe your love life, maybe your family life, maybe some of you love nature, some of you love music. These are all individual meanings that you can give to your life. That doesn't mean that life itself has one special meaning. It doesn't mean that we are here for any particular purpose, any more than mountains are here for a purpose or rocks are here for a purpose. Rocks are just here. Rocks just happen, they are here. Mountains just happen, they are here. There is a sense in which life is just here. Life came about through the evolutionary process. But after billions of years of evolution, life forms arose that had big brains, big nervous systems, and we've got the biggest brains of all for our size. And so our brains are capable of developing purposes of our own. We, with our big brains, can think of our own purposes. We can aim at things in life. We can have a grand design for the whole of our life, which is the privilege that we enjoy because our brains are so big. And the reason our brains are so big is that evolution gave us big brains. Over a very, very long period of time, the brains of our ancestors got gradually bigger and bigger and bigger until they eventually became so big that they're now capable of enjoying music and poetry and mathematics and love and all the things that give our lives meaning and give our lives our own individual purpose.
As a Christian, I have accepted existence as an objective moral standard. When I make choices, I could be confident that I was building my life on eternally valid truths. But if there is no God, do transcendent moral truth even exists? And it doesn't seem like that's the case. Finally, as a Christian, I have known that God himself spoke to the human race through Scripture. Many people regard the Bible as a grab bag of works of human authors, a record of spiritual experiences, or a set of ancient myths derived to convey moral lessons. But the Scripture tests to something more, and definitely being able to walk through that. And it does self-attest to itself. Oh, you believe the Bible because the Bible says to believe it. Well, I think that's a really good starting point. Yeah. If the Bible says you shouldn't believe it, well then I should leave it alone and not have to do anything with it. And so to base everything based off that little critique. I would always take that point and say, well, the Bible tells me to believe it. Isn't that a good starting point that we can have? And we can go into why more. And that's when you bring up a worldview standpoint.
Yeah, good. And so this is kind of her testimony that she's working through, right? And how she eventually came to L'Abri and had many of her questions answered. And here's the bottom line. She says, when people raise questions about Christianity, often the best response is not to shut them down, right? Yeah. Oh, you're just young now, and you'll eventually understand that, so just hang in there. She says, but precisely the opposite. Start by pressing them to take more seriously the implications of their own position. As a matter of intellectual integrity, they should stop freeloading and take a fearless inventory of the logical and practical conclusions of their own convictions.
Yeah. Or as Dr. Stokes says, be more skeptical, even of what you hold that you shouldn't be holding. Be more skeptical.
Right. So the stakes are high. What God has said to the ancient Hebrews is still true today. I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore choose life that you and your offspring may live. Christianity, she says, is either true or false, but it cannot be dismissed as inconsequential.
Right. Especially something that has a history of so long. If you want to have a revolution, the Copernican model, overthrowing the entire world, almost literally, you have to have that conversation, and to just wave it away as myth, or this is what you want, or whatever designation you want to put towards the Christian worldview. You at least have to bring it into the conversation.
Yeah.
And so here she closes with an encouragement to be all things to all people, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 9:2. Mm-hmm. He does not mean dressing like the locals, nor was he embracing cultural relativism. Instead, he was taking the assumptions of his audience into consideration in his language and approach. He tried to see the world through their eyes so he could communicate more persuasively. Mm-hmm. He was honoring them as fellow image bearers and saying, okay, here's what you're saying, and here are the implications to that. And so he's meeting them where they're at. He's not got a prepared speech of where you should be going, because he wants to take you there because he's memorized it. When he goes to the Acropolis and says, I see your religious people. That's got to be a weird stance for people to take, and I'm sure if Paul did that today, Christian Twitter would just be ablaze with saying, "Oh, that's not what you should be doing. Just stick to the Scripture. That's all you need." Yeah. And so we need to represent the other side accurately. We need to face the people that we're talking to in love, even when they're not being loving towards us, because that's what we're called to do.
That's right. So we're to speak the truth in love.
Right. Always be prepared for a defense for anyone who asks for the reason, the hope that is in you, and there's the truth. yet do it with gentleness and respect. There's the love. So 1 Peter 3:15. And so that's where we get the word, apologetics from, with apologia, a reason, a defense, but do so with gentleness and respect. And, we, again, have this understanding of, while we were haters of God, God loved us. He saved us from a great many things that we've done. And so when unbelievers act like unbelievers, we shouldn't be surprised, and we should want them to desire God in the way that we do. And so, in what way is your best witness? Again, God is the ultimate person that saves, but he uses us as the conduit, the means through which we bring people to salvation, where he brings people to saving knowledge. And so we need to have that gentleness. Live by faith, confident with God, that God is able to work good out of evil and injustice. If we do not cultivate the same confidence, the danger is that Christians will tend towards defensiveness and anger, and that's not where we want to be. We want to be loving, we want to be kind, we want to be gentle. All the fruits of the Spirit should be exemplified. And when they get angry, we shouldn't revel in that. We should...
I won.
Yeah. We're not there to win the debate. We're there to win the audience.
That's right. That's right.
So it's one of the good points that I like about her book is it's practical, even to the point of how to bring people to saving faith. And so that's what I appreciate about this.
Good.
So part 3 is going to be on the block for next time, and that's just pretty much the conclusion of kind of the implications of what to do with the 5 principles. And so we'll be covering that, and then we'll figure out what to do for our next book. If you want to help in that discussion, feel free to communicate with us. Those that are Patreon supporters, like Laura and Becca from Tulips and Honey, their Patreon support allows them to have more say in what we might do, and we'd love to grow that audience as well, and kind of float videos and ideas of what you'd like to see past you as well. And so
if you like what we're doing, press the like button, subscribe on YouTube.
Yeah, thanks for doing all that you have, and hopefully you've enjoyed the book study as much as I have with Tony, and I'm sure he gets something out of it too. So thanks for joining us this week, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.